Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who really thinks a lot about music and his family. And it's because of my family that I'm going to be reviewing the album pwrup by ACDC. You see, I was looking at all the new music that was coming out yesterday, and I was talking to my daughter about it, and I was reading off the new albums that are coming out and who's releasing what, and I said ACDC, and she goes, "Wait, aren't they the people that release information and suggestions about COVID?" I was like, no, no, that's C.D.C, the Center for Disease Control. So she heard ACDC and thought A.C.D.C. So I want to do this video for no other reason than simply to be able to title it a C.D.C recommendation, which is to say a recommendation of an ACDC album, which I do suggest you listen to if you like ACDC, or if you're like me and you tolerate ACDC. Now, my wife, who's from Eastern Europe, is a much bigger fan of ACDC than I am, which makes sense because Eastern Europe loves heavy metal and hard rock probably more than America does. I listened to this album with my son, and he was on the other end of the spectrum and just said, "I don't understand why anybody would listen to this." And I was like, "Do you hate it?" He's like, "No, it doesn't do anything for me." So I think that these are all kind of interesting perspectives, and I think if we put them all together, we can start to come to some sort of understanding of what makes this album interesting and what makes them interesting as a band. You will see that I have a guitar behind me. If you stay tuned until the end of this episode, I am going to try to improvise an ACDC song that would be written by the C.D.C. So I'm going to try to write a COVID song. I'm going to imagine that ACDC made a public service announcement for COVID. So stay tuned to the end, or better yet, don't. It's going to be bad. When I think about them, I always think of one very noticeable quote. So my guitar player in high school, I was in a band in high school, and my guitar player was a guy named Ben, an amazing guitarist. He's one of those people who had that ability to just hear a song and play it immediately. And he actually used to amaze me because he could play the song Thunderstruck by AC/DC. You know, he could play that, and I didn't know anyone else who could. It was very impressive. But he once said, AC/DC, you know, they only have one song, but it's a really good song. And I think that's a pretty good way of thinking about it. The thing about them, and I've thought this for a long time, is they are the most remarkably consistent and unchanging band you could have. My wife, who is a much larger AC/DC fan than I am, after listening to this album for a couple of days, said, you know, I could be listening to Highway to Hell, or I could be listening to this, and I couldn't even tell the difference. Their sound is so unbelievably consistent. Now, I think the problem with that is that the highs aren't that high, okay? Like, I mean, in general, like there's no AC/DC song where I go, oh, that's my jam. But then also the lows aren't that low. You can listen to this entire album and just like it. This album might be their worst album. I don't know. I'm not a super fan. You can tell me if you are in the comments. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just like every other album, every other song I've ever heard from this band. In a way, it's like this new album is just a unit of AC/DC. A solid, rock-solid unit of AC/DC. Maybe it's actually really good. I have a hard time telling. It could just be a question of repetition. I mean, the songs that stand out the most from their catalog comes from the fact that you've heard them so many times. But really, if you put them in the context of the album, none of them stand out that much, even if they're popular singles. When I'm thinking about my history with the band and how I have a sort of ambiguous relationship to them, I think part of the reason is this. When I was growing up, there was a TV show called Beavis and Butthead, which starred these two metalhead kids. And one of them had a Metallica shirt, and the other said AC/DC. And so I've always kind of classified these two bands in my head as being the bands that metalheads like. But I think this is a disservice. It's a disservice to Metallica, and it's a disservice to AC/DC. First of all, Metallica is all highs and lows, right? I mean, they come out with an album like Load and people lose their mind, and they cut their hair and people lose their mind, and they go pop and people lose their mind. They're constantly pushing, constantly evolving. They have albums like Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All, and then they have albums that just completely defy expectation and understanding, and they're always pushing and always trying to do the most with real metal. And they are sort of the alpha and the omega of real heavy metal. Whereas ACDC isn't. I mean, if you had to classify ACDC, you could spend a lot of time calling them, you know, hard rock, heavy metal adjacent, proto-heavy metal, blues rock. But they're just rock and roll. Like, they are just the most rock and roll. That's what they are. For good and for bad, just straight down the middle, never veering, rock and roll. In a way, it makes me think of the famous, I think it was Mitt Romney, who said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me." I don't think that AC/DC left rock and roll. I think rock and roll left AC/DC, and they just kept going. And what's amazing is that they are always they're always delivering this promise of their music. And that's why this is a C.D.C recommendation from me. If you're living through COVID and everything is upside down and nothing seems like it makes sense anymore, just put on a cup of AC/DC. Listen to this new album. I was reassured, knowing that they sound the same, they move along, they've had death, they've had change, all these times since they started in the mid-'70s or even early '70s. It's just reassuring. And the nice thing is, it's never pathetic. Like a band of dudes who, they must be in their 60s, right? Like, making rock and roll that sounds like they did when they were in their 20s, you'd think it'd be pathetic, but it's not. Like, there's no comeback. You can't come back when you never left, right? This rock and roll line that they just keep on going down, they can't even come back. They just keep doing it. I don't know. In this time of chaos and change, it is actually reassuring, especially if you like that song. I like the AC/DC song. I don't love it, but I definitely like it. In another way, what makes them such an interesting band is how do they achieve this consistency? I don't even understand it. I mean, Metallica has had some turnover, right? The bass player dying and etc. But in general, they're very consistent, and yet they change. Whereas AC/DC is essentially the ship of Theseus. You know, that's that old story about, you know, like little pieces of Theseus's ship get taken away, and how much of the ship has to be the original ship before you say it's a different ship. Or Houdini's wand, you know, like if you cut Houdini's wand into 1,000 pieces and then build new wands out of each of those pieces, is it still Houdini's wand? What is AC/DC? Very early in their career, their lead singer, Bon Scott, died, and they were replaced him with Brian Johnson, and I suppose you can tell the difference. If you are an AC/DC fan and I'm offending you, I apologize. I can't tell the difference. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap is probably my favorite AC/DC album that I own, and I thought it was Brian Johnson up until I read yesterday in their Wikipedia that album was released after Bon Scott's death, but recorded before, at least in America. And it's an amazing trick that they were able to do. You know, you take Van Halen, another hard rock and roll group, where when their lead singer left, they went with someone completely different. He did something totally wild. And it seems as though basically every member of the band, except for Angus Young, is the drummer in Spinal Tap. If you look at the history of the band and members who have come in and who've left and who are there, right, it just keeps on, everyone keeps coming in and coming out and leaving and going back. I mean, the drummer being arrested for meth and procuring murder, all these kinds of super wild things happening, which is what makes this album interesting, because Malcolm Young, who's half of the songwriters of AC/DC, it's Angus Young and Malcolm Young, two Scottish brothers who moved to Australia when they were young. Well, I guess they're always young. You know, they are the songwriting core. It is the rhythm guitar and it is the lead guitar, and that's what, you know, really drives the whole group. Malcolm Young died a couple years ago, and so he was replaced. And this is what's amazing, is he was replaced, but I couldn't really tell. Now, he was replaced, I guess, with a cousin, Stevie Young, not to be confused with the quarterback of the 49ers. But, like, what this made me do, and this is a special treat, I think, for this album. And if you're like me, you're sort of, like, I own, I don't know, 4 AC/DC albums, and I only listen to them, like, when I want to listen to that one feeling, when I want to get that feeling, right? So I don't really pay that much attention. what I came to realize in listening to this, in order to listen to the quality of the rhythm guitar, made me realize the strength of AC/DC is not Angus Young. It's Malcolm Young. It's the rhythm guitar. When you think about what makes AC/DC great, what makes their hits great, it's how good and how strong the rhythm guitar is. The flashiness, the schoolboy outfits, and the duck walks and the solos of Angus Young are great, and they're totally necessary. But it's really the skill that they have. Like, what makes the AC/DC song good is that amazing ability to have just such pounding, awesome, rhythmic, strong rhythm guitar. And they did it. On this album, it's great. It just works. It still works. Angus Young's solos are still great. The rhythm guitar is still pounding, is still wonderful. And then we have the lead singer, Brian Johnson. Forcing myself to know I had to talk about this album and really give it the amount of respect it deserves made me really listen to Brian Johnson, right? The lead singer. Dear God, I hope that's his name. It is Brian Johnson, right? You can just tell me in the comments if I'm wrong. It's okay. He has built-in dynamics to his voice. So he has the famous screech, all that. But then he also has his growl, hoo, and like having that hoo, dynamics is interesting. I mean, I can't think of many other singers who have such a wide dynamic in their singing styles, built into their singing styles. Like it wouldn't be an AC/DC song without both of those things. So when listening to this album, which is a continuation of the same song, at least in my untrained ears, the same song I've heard from them from their first album until this album, it helped me to understand what makes this song so good. It's that rhythm guitar, it's that lead guitar, and it's the vocals with all this dynamism and just this wonderful pounding rock and roll quality. I did read one little piece of trivia. This is the first album, I guess, since '83 that they did not include the word rock in any of their song titles, which I think is a shame because it is part of what makes them so interesting, is just this absolute dedication to rock. The movie School of Rock, I enjoy somewhat. I find it somewhat annoying, but it's very clear the fact that they choose to focus on an AC/DC song that really is like the Jack Black, like kind of rock, like what is rock and roll? I think it's them, after all. It's the simplest unit of rock and roll, which I guess makes sense because it's so based on Chuck Berry, because Angus Young is so in love with Chuck Berry, not just in doing the duck walk, but in the way he plays guitar. Okay, so now I'm going to go track through track. Even though I just spent 10 minutes, 12 minutes telling you that all the songs are the same, I'm not going to let it rest there. I'm going to go into some detail and tell you why I like some songs more than others, because this whole like reduction of their catalog to one song is maybe true in spirit, but it's obviously not true in fact, right? So it opens up with a song called Realize, great, powerful, strong, driving song. The lyrics in this album in general are very underneath, very hard to pick out all the lyrics, which is sometimes for the better. But a nice kind of like super lowering and raising chorus behind, and just the drums are just going so hard, just really, really hard. It's nice that I guess the drummer's out of jail. The next track is called Rejection, very simple chords. Again, this falls into the category of what humorist and unfortunate conservative weirdo Adam Carolla called date rape rock. The whole song is like, the lyrics are like, if you reject me, I'll take what I want. Hey, Angus, Malcolm, this not the right note to be hitting. But it's a good song. Awesome guitar solo. If for nothing else, I'm just so happy to have more music that has guitar solos. I really regret the fact that we've moved on to this computer age and where we just don't have guitar solos anymore, because every Angus Young guitar solo is a treat. It's just a treat to listen to. Shot in the Dark is a little bit more boring, a little bit more, it's less drive than the other ones. A lot of cliches in the songwriting, a shot in the dark beats a walk in the park. But, I mean, you don't really listen to them for their songwriting. But again, in my notes here, just so you know, I don't have a script, I have notes. Just so you know, right here, I just wrote, God damn, I love his solos. I just love Angus Young and the way he plays guitar. And I listened to Highway to Hell again recently just to get ready for this. And it's just great. And I think he's both overrated and underrated at the same time. right? Like, I don't think he's one of the top 20 guitar players of all time, whatever some people say, but I also think that snobs like me, who often dismiss him, really sell him short on just how great his solos are and how memorable they usually are. The next track is called Through the Mists of Time. And the first time I listened to it, I thought, well, this is kind of a miss. But actually, I ended up really liking it. I mean, it's a lot more cliches, but there's a sweetness to the guitar here. And the guitar solo leads into another kind of stadium rock moment. And one thing I would say that's nice is that they're an old rock band. And old rock bands are plagued with the insistence of singing about being an old rock band. And this album doesn't really have that. This song is about, being old and looking back, but it's not quite like, last year's Who album or whatever. It's not like, we used to do it, didn't we? It's a little bit like, hey, we're old, but I think it's okay. Kick You When You're Down, cliche alert. Nice kind of descending guitar lines here, almost a jig at times. I think that at times when they write songs, you could sort of imagine doing Irish dancing to it, just because it has good sort of single note runs on the guitar. Why do they kick you when you're down? Okay, this is going to be weird. I don't know AC/DC's politics, but I think given the way that our current president is taking the election, I think that a lot of this could actually match a lot of Trump's rhetoric, like talking about rejection, like being rejected by the vote and taking what he wants. And a shot in the dark is sort of like, might as well vote for me because it's better than a walk in the park, like what you're used to. And then, kick you when you're down. He's often complaining about people, picking on him. I don't know. That's not what this album's about. It's just a weird coincidence. I hope. Next track, Witch's Spell. I don't know. I don't like songs about witches or black magic. But there's good drumming. Demon's Fire. I don't really care about songs about demons either. This is funny because it starts with the super growl that he often does. A nice kind of breakdown. The song gets kind of cut too short. Next track, Wild Reputation. It's filler. It's fine. No Man's Land has a cool clanging guitar, like kind of a clanging guitar sound. And then the next two tracks are fun. The next track, Systems Down, is maybe my favorite guitar solo, maybe my favorite song on the album. I would play it for you, but you know what AC/DC sounds like. But it's maybe the best song on the album. Nice kind of like guitar chords being played and then inverted. Then we get to the beautiful song Money Shot. And the thing about AC/DC is they are famous for their single entendres and double entendres. They're songs that are, about sex, but they pretend that they're not. So this is maybe the grossest. Money Shot, best served while hot. Okay, thank you. That was great. Subtle. So subtle. But it's part of what makes AC/DC charming is their weird grossness here. And then the album ends with a track called Code Red. Has a cool kind of spidery guitar line. Very hard-hitting drums underneath. Just great. It's a very, very solid, strong album. And I'm very happy to have listened to it. I like AC/DC, and if you do too, I recommend you listen to this. So let's get to my song. First of all, I need to say another joke. We were talking to my daughter, and we were talking to her about, we were talking at the table, we were having some cinnamon rolls, and we were talking about Christian rock. And she goes, who's Christian rock? Like she thought it was the name of a person, which is pretty funny. And that was after the C.D.C. thing. So I was trying to think, how would AC/DC write a song about COVID? And I just have the title, so we're going to see how this works. I think they'd have a title about masks. And they would call the song, Put It On Your Face. Doesn't that work? Right? Doesn't that sound like an AC/DC song? Like kind of sexual, kind of weird, kind of uncomfortable? Put it on your face now. Imagine doing race. Put it on your face. Cover your face. Okay, I really should have written this down. That's all I've got. If you'd like to complete the song, please let me know. Put it on your face. Right? Couldn't you see them doing it? I don't know what the rest of the lyrics would be. Cover up, put it on your face. Cover up your... Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, if you like that song, please leave a comment. If you hate that song, please leave a comment. Or don't. It doesn't really matter. All right, so my recommendation is listen to this album. It's comforting. It's good. It rocks.